Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. Today I'm going to be creating some French style home decor. For my project today, I'm going to be working on this little MDF box here. It has got a lid and I did actually use it as a little test piece when I first started using Pentart's Fine Line Crackle, so that's why that's underneath. But I'm going to give this a makeover today. I'm going to begin by using Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer in white. I'm going to be applying one coat, letting that dry for about 30 minutes and then coming in with the second coat. This is definitely an important step because the MDF is very thirsty in some areas. It really was sucking up that primer straight away. And also you just want it to have more of an even surface for your paint products to go on. As you can see, I am applying it both inside and outside of the box because I am going to be adding paint and products to the inside and outside. So I definitely want all of those surface areas primed and ready to go. Once my primer was completely dry, I took out Paint Couture's Italian Ivory mineral paint and I'm going to be applying 2 coats of this. Now this has a built-in sealer, so that is going to make it a bit easier throughout my project. I'm not going to have to add a sealer to my whole project. And I'm just being very mindful to go back and fix my brush strokes up because obviously I'm having to change directions a few times here to get into all of the grooves. I also have a little dent on the edge of the lid, and unfortunately I have made the mistake of not using the side that doesn't have the dent, so you will notice that throughout the video, but I'm just going to embrace those imperfections. So I am going in now and going underneath the lid with that Italian Ivory, and I'm of course going to paint the base that same beautiful cream tone inside and out. Once my 2 coats of Italian Ivory paint were dry, I took out this beautiful floral swag style design. This is by IOD, it's from their Lost Garden transfer. And then I took out this stencil here that I got from Etsy a little while ago. I'm going to be layering the stencil over the top. So here I'm just having a look at how the different elements are going to work. I then went in and peeled the backing off the transfer and I'm going to position that in the center. Once I have that centered, I'm going to use the plastic transfer stick that comes in the pack, and I'm going to start by going over the top of the whole transfer to get that really sticking down well, and then I'm going to pick up a corner of the plastic and start rubbing that transfer. And as you can see, as I'm lifting the plastic, the transfer is releasing, and I'm just going to continue to do that until I have the entire transfer down. Now I am applying this over the top of a paint that has a built-in sealer, so this was really easy to transfer. To seal my transfer, I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in Satin. You want to do this to protect your transfer, especially if you're going to be layering in other products. I'm going to go the extra mile. I'm actually going to do 4 coats of my sealer. I'm doing this because I'm going to be using Pentart's Fine Line Crackle, and I want to make sure that I've got enough layers between that and my transfer to make sure that it doesn't crack. When that was dry, I took out Aged Bronze Metallic Stencil Paste. I'm applying that over the top of the stencil with a palette knife. I'm going to begin by adding the corner details. You can see I'm going over the top of those. I'm also going to be adding the lovely crown and the swirls underneath, but I'm not going to be adding the text that's in the center. I want that beautiful floral to be the focal point in the center, and I am actually going to have to do this in stages. I'm going to be repositioning the stencil once this stencil paste up the top is dry, and I definitely need to make sure that it's dry so that when I reposition the stencil, I don't disturb it or smudge it. So this did take a little bit more time and a little bit more planning, but it was definitely worth it to be able to get quite a custom look. So keep that in mind if you are working with stencils and it doesn't quite fit your project. Work in sections, apply the stencil paste, give it time to dry, and then come in and do the other section. So here I'm just removing the stencil from the top. I did go in with a hairdryer and really got that nice and dry. I cleaned off my stencil and now I'm repositioning it so that I can have the beautiful corner details and the fleur-de-lis and the scrolls down the bottom, just so that it's spaced a bit better. Once I've got it lined up, I'm going to go in and just like before, I'm going to start adding my stencil paste. You definitely don't want to overload your palette knife when you are doing this, and you want to make sure that your stencil is pressed down nice and firm to your surface. I'm also spreading out that stencil paste, making sure that I've got it as even as possible. And this has a really nice sort of metallic shine to it, so it really was a lovely choice, I think, for this project. Next, I focus my attention on the base. I'm going to be using this other stencil that I had in my stash. If I can find the stencils, I will be sure to link some options for you guys in the description below. I'm going to use some masking tape to hold that stencil in place, and I'm only going to be using parts of this. I don't want the numbers, and I don't want the lines that are down the bottom, but I do want the Paris, the fleur-de-lis, and the beautiful corner details. So I'm just taping that in place, and once I have that nice and secure, I'm going to repeat the same process as I did for the lid of the box. I'm going to start applying that stencil paste over the top. You could definitely use Paint Couture's embossing medium for this step if this particular color wasn't for you, and then you could go in and layer a different colored paint over the top of those raised details. I just really am loving this aged bronze at the moment. It's perfect for my projects. Or you could just do a normal stencil instead. It doesn't have to be raised. So I'm going over the top of the elements that I want to keep, and then I'm going to gently remove my stencil from the surface. I did notice there was a few little areas where I got some of the stencil paste that I didn't really want it, but because I have the Italian Ivory there with the built-in sealer, I'm able to go in with a wet wipe and wipe back the areas that I don't want. While that paste was drying, I did take the opportunity to go in and add a couple of coats of the Italian Ivory on the bottom. I didn't feel the need to add any primer. The bottom felt a bit more porous than the other sections of the box. When that was dry, I grabbed this other stencil, and I'm going to be using this little address and positioning that underneath. I felt like it fit perfectly. I was just very careful to press that stencil right down flush to my surface. And as you can see, I'm using a minimal amount of product. I don't want to overload it, and then I lifted that straight up. Again, I'm able to tidy up any errors with a wet wipe. Next, I'm going to clean off my stencil, and I'm going to be using that same beautiful corner detail in each of the corners on the outside of my box. So again, I did have to work in sections. So for example here, I wouldn't be able to just automatically reposition the stencil and start stenciling because I would smudge my work there. So I then turned my attention to the back. I'm going to be adding the same corner details, but I'm not going to add any text. I'm just going to save that for the front section, and then I'm going to continue to add the beautiful corner details to each of the sides, making sure to clean my stencil in between each of those applications. Once I'd finished adding the corner details, I touched up a few areas on the lid that I'd missed. Next, I took out IOD's Acanthus mold, and I'm adding some cornstarch to the beautiful beaded detail from that mold, and I'm rolling up some Das air dry clay and then working it into that mold. Now this one can be a bit tricky, especially as you are getting down to those smaller little beads there. So it can be a good idea sometimes to use resin, but I don't need all of those little pieces, so I wasn't too phased with that. I'm just going to lay my beads where I want them to go, and I'm just going to pull off that larger bead. It felt a little bit too big, and then I'm going to cast another one, and here you can see I'm just working out how much of that mold I'm going to be using. Once I'm happy with that, I am going to be using my Sealy's Quickset wood glue. I'm going to apply the glue directly to the box surface, spreading that out with my finger, and then I'm going to position my clay castings in that glue. Once I finished gluing those in place, I went in and did some more casting so that I could repeat the same pattern on the back of the little box there. First of all, I then did a little partial casting to fill in the gap in the center. I'm also going to be repeating that on the sides of the box, but because obviously I have less room to work with, I am going to be making them a little bit shorter. So I'm just going to work my way around gluing down those different castings. And I think this was a really nice touch, something simple that I could add, but I think it really elevated the look of the project. I'm going to let that dry overnight, and then I took out IOD's Velveteen Stamp. I haven't used these yet, so I'm going to take those out. As you can see, there's some really gorgeous damask style designs to pick from. These would be perfect for creating a patterned look, maybe almost like old wallpaper, but I'm really loving this smaller design that has the little bunch of flowers in it. But first I need to use some 220 grit sandpaper to just really lightly scuff my stamps. You only ever do this once in the life of your stamps. It just helps the ink to stick a bit better as opposed to sort of beading on the surface. So once I've done that, I am going to be peeling off the stamp that I want to use, and I'm going to be using IOD's Stone Grey Permanent Ink. I'm going to ink up my stamp, and then I'm going to be positioning this one in the center of the base inside my box. I just want it to keep it simple but have a little detail so that when you open up the box, it's not just a plain bottom there. And then I took out Countryside Memoirs stamp by IOD. I'm using that same stone grey ink. I really love this sweet little swallow bird design, so I'm going to put that one there in the left hand corner. I am going to gently press that down. I always have one hand holding the stamp in place, and then I'm going to grab another one of the swallow designs, repeat that same process, add some stone grey ink, and that one's going to go on the right hand side. The next day, I came in with Pentart's Fine Line Crackle Varnish. I'm going to begin with step 1, and I'm going to start by applying it to the lid of my box. I'm just going to apply it to the center part. I'm not going to add it to the border that goes around the outside. I am having to change the direction of my brush strokes a few times because of that raised stencil. I want to make sure I've got really good coverage over all of those areas. I'm going to do one even coat. I'm going to add that to the lid, but I'm also going to add it around the outside of the box. Again, just keeping it to the top section there, not adding it to our castings or our base. I am also going to be adding it to the inside of the box, again just adding it to the center. I didn't want to go over the top with this, but it is a really beautiful look, so it was something that I wanted to do. And remember, I have got 4 layers of clear coat protecting my transfer. I then actually used a hairdryer to speed up the process of drying, and then I took out step 2 of the fine line crackle process, and I'm going to apply it in the same spots that I have the step 1. And I was really careful to make sure that I had nice even coverage, because I found that if I use too much and I don't make sure that it's a nice even coat, that occasionally I can get some pooling of the product and you can sort of see some brown marks. So I was definitely very careful not to make that mistake this time. So I'm going along, evening that all out, being very mindful of the raised stencils, and then I'm going to add it to the inside and of course around the outside. Just like I did with step 1, I did use a hairdryer to speed up the drying process. Before I went any further, I did take out my bronze Lux Metallic, and I'm going to be going around and adding that around the border of the lid to begin with. I really wanted that beautiful bronze. For me, it definitely brings a really beautiful, elegant, almost regal look to it. So it's definitely something I wanted to add, especially for my French style project. I'm going around, I'm using an angled brush. This is just a small artist brush, and I am going to end up having to do 2 coats. Once I finished adding it to the border of the lid, I did then move on and start adding it to the base of my box there. Again, I'm not going to add it to the bead section or anywhere else. I just really like the look of this as a border, sort of a trim feature piece. Next, I took out Pentart's Antique Paste. Now this is Umber, and I'm going to be applying that with a paper towel, and I'm just really working it into the cracks that were formed. I realized I had to use a lot more product to really work it into those cracks, to really make them sort of reveal themselves, because I had to change directions quite a few times just to make sure that I was really finding those beautiful cracks. And I also have another paper towel that I'm using to wipe off the excess and to sort of blend the look, but I do still want it to have an antiqued look, so I don't need it to be only sitting in the cracks. So I'm just going to continue to add that. You can also use pigments. I have done that in a previous video where I just used some dark pigments, but as I said, I want this to have an antiqued look, so using the antique paste really did the trick, I think. And I really love the crackle that I was able to achieve on the lid of this piece. I feel that adding the paste was a little bit of a process. I would see cracks that I missed, and I sort of went in with a few layers just to make sure that I didn't miss any of those cracks. I then moved on to the inside, and unfortunately, even though it looked like I had really decent cracks, they just didn't seem to be deep enough to really catch much of the antique paste that I was using. So that was a bit disappointing that I'd gone to the effort of putting it on the inside and you couldn't really see many cracks. But the outside did turn out a little bit better, which was great. But again, it was a process. I had to go in with a few different layers to really find those cracks, to really highlight them with the antiquing paste. So I would definitely recommend that you sort of go around your project, add that initial paste, and then if you can still see some cracks that haven't really shown up, add another layer. I found that that really worked, and I was able to find a few cracks that I missed the first time. Once that paste was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze. This is a water-based product, and I'm going to be adding it just to the beaded clay details. I'm really working it into the details. I prefer to use a glaze when I am adding that antiqued look as opposed to a paste. I find I've got a little bit more work time as well, and considering I'm adding it and then wiping it away, I definitely need the freedom to be able to do that. So I'm adding it, then pulling it back with a wet wipe. And I'm just going to continue to add that around the beaded base detail, being careful not to get too much on the section that has the paste. The paste is a solvent-based product, and as we know, water and oil don't really work that great together. So I'm just working in sections. And I am also going to have some of my antiquing glaze on the bronze, because I find that it really deepens the color, and it's also going to work its way into some of the texture that was already on the MDF. And then I'm going to go in and add it to the inside of my box and also around the top edges. Remember, the Italian Ivory mineral paint has that built-in sealer, so I'm able to wipe back as much or as little as I want. I'm adding some of the glaze to the top as well, and then I took that same stencil and repositioning it over just the crown section. I'm going to add some bronze just to bring some of that bronze to the center part of the lid. I'm just layering that over the top of the dry, aged bronze metallic paste that's already there, and this is just going to give it a little bit more shine. And here's a look at our finished French style home decor. I love how this turned out. I think that the transfers, the stencils and the stamps, and of course the molds all work together to create quite a regal looking piece. But let me know what you think of this in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find a full product list and my affiliate links in the description below. Thanks for watching.